Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is episode number 9 of Pop Culturally Deprived, and today we're going to be talking about the 80s classic Heathers on your Lick It Up Baby podcast. Today I'm joined by my friend Sherry Slade. Sherry is the USA Today bestselling author of sexy new adult romance. When she isn't tolling away in the nonprofit sector, she's writing gritty stories about identity and people who make terrible choices in the name of love or lust. Somehow it all works out in the end. And a great story is how I met Sherry. We actually met on Twitter several years ago because there was this online live tweet of Buffy going on every week. It was the hashtag Buffy Club. And Sherry and I both really love Buffy. So the rest was history.
Hi, Mandy. Yes, Buffy Club, my first foray into public fandom. And also, I am here because I'm a super fan of Heathers, which I cannot believe you had never seen. It's one of my all time favorite movies.
I get that about everything that I haven't seen.
I know. It's adorable. So, the first time I saw Heathers, I was way too young to be watching it. I think I was maybe 10 years old.
Wow.
A really precocious 10 years old. It was on, I think, HBO at my grandparents' house, and I was riveted. And I have loved it ever since. The horror of it is really what appeals to me, and what appealed to me when I was little, which, says everything you need to know about me.
Fair enough. Okay, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and production of the movie. Heathers was released in the United States in March of 1989. It's a black comedy, and I actually had to look up what a black comedy is, and it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a work that employs black humor, or it's humor that makes light of an otherwise serious subject matter, and that describes this movie to a T. It performed poorly at the cinema, earning only 1.1 million domestically, having a $3 million budget.
Boo.
But it did gain a cult status. I mean, between the VHS sales and all the rentals and home video, it really has become super popular. It was written by Daniel Waters, who was a video store clerk at the time. This was his very first script, and his original draft came in at over 200 pages long and included a much higher body count, which
Oh
I'm
my
really glad the
goodness.
movie didn't end up being that long.
I can't, I can't imagine a higher body count in a teen movie
Right?
and have it
uh,
still be funny.
I'm wondering if he was actually going for funny at that point. I don't know. So, Winona Ryder, who played Veronica, had previously starred in the very successful Beetlejuice, being praised for her performance as goth teenager Lydia. Although her agent warned her off, she garnered critical respect for her performance as Veronica. I actually read that her agent warned her that she would never work again if she took the role, which I thought was ridiculous. The New York Times wrote very favorably about her and said Miss Ryder, in particular, manages to be both stunning and sympathetic as the watchful Veronica, and she has the glamorous presence of a promising new star, which I thought was a really nice thing.
That is very nice.
Her co star, Christian Slater, had a less positive time of it. His previous film was Gleaming the Cube, a skateboarding action mystery film, if you can imagine. And side note here, my brother watched that movie obsessively when we were kids. So I had a crush on Christian Slater just out of sheer exposure because anytime I was there, that's the movie that was on television. I have no idea what it was about. I just remember Christian Slater skateboarding. But hey.
Oh.
And the Washington Post compared Slater's character to an impersonation of Jack Nicholson, but certainly wasn't the only publication to do so. They said in his first time out as a villain, he bankrupts his role with his Son of Shining shtick, which I think is a little bit harsh, but absolutely on point.
I think it is on point, but I think it's something that's haunted Christian Slater throughout his career. That he himself is so much like Nicholson that he can't escape those comparisons.
Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. There have also been three failed attempts at bringing Heathers back as a TV show. Once in 1990, but Fox decided to pick up Shannon Doherty's Beverly Hills 90210 instead. Once in 2009, and most recently in 2012 when Bravo intended to adapt a sequel set 20 years later following Veronica's teenage daughter. However, Heathers will actually see the light of day again. TV Land will debut its first hour-long original series this fall. 10 episodes will air, and Shannon Doherty guest stars in the pilot. I'm actually
I'm
really
so
excited
excited.
about that. I
Yes.
think it's going to be awesome.
Did you know it was also adapted as a musical?
I saw that come up when I was looking, but I didn't dive too deeply into it just because the idea of a Heathers musical scares me.
I did not see it, but I hear it's pretty amazing. So, you know, bleak topics on stage can go well. And I love a good musical.
I did just go see Hedwig and the Angry Inch last weekend, and that's pretty bleak and dark too, and it was amazing.
Hmm.
So I suppose,
Once more with
teen
feeling.
suicide and high school murder can be great.
Sure.
Okay, so quick synopsis. This is just kind of how I think of the movie. Heathers is a teen high school dramedy, or I guess black comedy, about popular Veronica who gets fed up with the mean girl ways of the Heathers. When Veronica and new boyfriend JD accidentally kill Heather number one, they stage it as a suicide, and then the body count builds as Veronica tries to deal with the fallout, or lack thereof.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, I'm biased because I wrote it, but I think that's pretty accurate.
So, I mean, really, how have you gone this long without seeing this movie? It's right in like the jam of culty, teen, snarky entertainment that I know you love.
Right, it should be right up my alley. But honestly, this was never a movie that was even on my radar. I don't think I'd even heard of it until I was maybe late teens, early 20s. Everybody knows by now I was very, very young in the 80s, and so I wouldn't have watched this at that age. I mean, I grew up in a very strict household where I wasn't allowed to watch HBO. I wasn't even allowed to watch The Smurfs. So I would never have been allowed to watch this movie as a kid. And then as I got older, there were just other new things that held my attention instead. I guarantee you there's not a 90s teen movie that I haven't seen.
Okay, that's fair. I'll give you a pass.
Okay. I've
I
seen
will
it
give
now
you
though, so
have seen it now, and I have said this so many times since learning that you hadn't seen it, but I so wish I could have watched your face as you experienced Heather's for the first time in a completely not creepy way, just sort of like sat on the edge of the sofa and chin hands, and just watched as you experience the complete mayhem.
mayhem is a good word.
What did you think Heather's was?
Honestly, I thought it was just going to be the 80s version of Mean Girls. And that is so not what this movie is about. Not even a little bit. And it just completely subverted my expectations. I'll say that
So,
because
yeah, no, it's not in any way, shape, or form the fluffy bunny movie that is Mean Girls. But it does have some parallels. So, you weren't completely off the mark there. But the opening scene is one of my favorites in film, actually, because it so cleverly draws the viewer in and lulls the viewer into this false sense of security. There's this kind of lullaby music, and there's this idyllic setting and this very, very green grass and these beautifully dressed attractive teenagers being very proper, and then Winona Ryder's head in the ground for, croquet.
right, right.
And it's a dream sequence. That's the beauty of it. It is Winona Ryder actually having a dream, and in her dreams, she is tormented by the Heathers.
Oh, see, I didn't understand that. I didn't really understand what the scene was about, and I couldn't figure out how it fit into the rest of the movie other than
Oh.
I knew it was somehow driving Veronica's like hate fire for the Heathers, but I could not figure out one, how they would have gotten her buried willingly
Oh,
and how they were
no.
actually hitting balls at her. And so
No.
it makes so much more sense that it's a dream.
Right, because she's writing in her diary. Like that's she's, transcribing her experiences and her hopes and her dreams, just like, any teen girl of the 80s would do, in her diary. So she's dear diarying her experience with the Heathers.
I think that's why I thought it had actually happened because I thought she was writing about something that she experienced that made her hate
Ah,
them even more. And I totally didn't pick
ah.
up that it was a dream.
I I think it's for me it's pretty clear that she's not going to crawl into the ground and and let them wing mallets
True.
and balls at her head. But I mean, if you take it very literally, then yes. But yeah, so that was a dream sequence,
Okay.
and or not. I don't know. Depends on how you want to analyze the film.
I tend to take things a little too literally. But to be fair, when I saw the scene, it was the first scene of the movie, and so I hadn't experienced Veronica's character and
Right.
personality yet. So now that I'm thinking about it, you're absolutely right. There's no way Veronica would have let that happen. But at the time, I was just thinking, holy crap, they're hitting croquet balls at Winona Ryder's head.
Right. So there's Winona, and obviously you knew her. Had you seen Beetlejuice? You've seen Beetlejuice.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Beetlejuice was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I watched it over and over and over again. That was back when had a crush on Alec Baldwin,
Oh
which
my
maybe I should
goodness.
mumble a little
Yeah.
bit.
We cannot be held responsible for the lusts of our young hearts.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
One day I'll tell you who my weird adolescent movie crush was, but not
Oh,
today.
I think you might have to tell me today.
I might have to tell. I don't. No, I'm not going to. Nope. Sorry.
Okay.
So, so you knew Winona and Shannon Doherty, and we've established Christian Slater. What was your experience of these actors going into this movie?
Shannon Doherty is always going to be Brenda to me. That's just who she is. Or later, she was grown up Brenda, who was renamed Prue, because Prue and Brenda were essentially the same character. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And Christian Slater, I probably really couldn't name very many of his movies. I know Gleaming the Cube and I know Bed of Roses.
Oh,
Beyond that, I'm really not super remembering what he was in just off the top of my head, but I know he was in a lot of stuff in the 80s and 90s.
oh my God.
Let's just say Baby Mandy thought he was beautiful, so
Oh yeah. Well, we all, I think, of an age loved Christian Slater and thought he was very beautiful. He was in so many movies, dude. Pump Up the Volume. Have
no,
you?
I haven't seen that.
Oh, Untamed Heart.
I have seen that. That movie makes me cry.
Oh, it's so good. But you need to see Pump Up the Volume, which is a character similar to JD. I think Christian Slater and Winona Ryder and Shannon Doherty all sort of play the same character a lot over and over again.
Yeah, yeah, they do.
Um, Winona Ryder has some range, but they're all sort of in their little wheelhouse, especially in this movie. I think Heather Duke had a very Brenda quality to her. She starts off kind of soft spoken and sweet, but by the end of the run, she's a raving bitch.
Right.
So, that's pretty Brenda.
That is exactly Brenda's arc, actually.
So, this was proto Brenda here in Heather Duke, and but Christian Slater. Oh,
Did you know that both Winona Ryder and Christian Slater have played parts in the Star Trek franchise?
no.
Christian Slater apparently was in Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. And fun fact,
Okay.
his mother was the casting director of that movie. I think it was a small part. I haven't
Interesting.
actually seen the movie.
Oh.
But in the reboot, Winona Ryder plays Spock's mom.
You know,
Yeah,
I didn't know that, and I'm not a huge Trekkie.
that doesn't surprise me. But when I found that out, I had to mention it
It is
because it's
interesting.
so unexpected
Yeah, I
for
would
both of
not have
them.
guessed that in a million years. Really would not have guessed that, but I would have guessed that you loved Christian Slater because I loved him too. And I love him so much when he plays a misunderstood bad boy, which is what he plays in this movie, and it's what he plays in Pump Up the Volume, and it's what he plays in Untamed Heart. And
It's just
uh,
who he is.
it's who he is. But in this movie, it goes to an extreme, like the extremist extreme. But
Yes.
before we talk about all of the details of this movie, did you like it? Did you love it? What did you think?
Oh, you want me to say I loved it so badly. I can hear it in your voice.
I want everyone to love it, but I know that can't be.
I think it has potential for me to really, really like it, but I'm not there yet. I thought I was going into one kind of movie and ended up experiencing a completely different kind of movie, and I wasn't prepared for that. And so I kind of came out of it thinking, what did I just watch? And so it's taken me a while to kind of process and, really kind of understand what the movie was trying to say and what it was about. And I do think I will rewatch it at some point, and I will probably appreciate it much more at that point.
That makes sense. And I think that sort of speaks to why the movie did better on video than in the theater
Oh, that's a good
because
point.
it's not a movie that you necessarily watch once and go, oh my God, that was amazing. It's when you go, oh my God, what the fuck? And then watch it again and again until you understand really what you just experienced.
Right.
And it really holds up to rewatching because of that. Because every time you watch it again, something else kind of bubbles up to the surface that you can go, oh, that's what that meant. And then you can start quoting along with it, and that's always fun. But expectation is huge for how we process genre media, as a romance writer, romance readers, when you're expecting a contemporary romance, if you open up a book and you get science fiction, you're not going to love it, even though maybe you would like science fiction in some other setting because you were expecting one thing. It sets you up for disappointment. So I wish I had clarified just how.
Right. But, honestly, I like going into these things blind. I try,
Yeah.
it's really hard to be spoiler free, especially for something that came out in the 80s. But I try my hardest to avoid anything about it. I don't even Google production information until after I've seen it,
Oh, wow.
just so that I can approach it really for the first time with fresh eyes. And so I guess that's really not what I did though, because I did expect it to be Mean Girls. And so I
Right.
kind of had somewhere that information
Preconceived.
filtered in. I'm not sure
Well,
why. It may just be because it was four girls and Winona Ryder.
right. And well, and there's that iconic imagery of like the Heathers. Whenever there's a clip or something, you see that like the three girls and then Winona. And so it's clear from any kind of marketing that you would look at that she isn't of them, but not one of them.
Right.
So that's interesting. And I think that maybe you absorbed that by osmosis. It's definitely
Probably.
teen movie. So that speaks, to you as a viewer. Like you can look at the media surrounding the movie and go, okay, this I'm going to put this in the teen box. And on top of that, it is hardcore satire. So it is taking teen movies and ripping them apart. So you've got your, ugly ducklings and your Cinderellas and your bad boys and your jocks and all of these sort of archetypes that are in all of these teen movies. They're in Heathers, but they're just taken to the next level. So if you had that experience in your past viewing, like John Hughes movies, you'd take that in with you in watching this. Were you into John Hughes movies? Did you have that background information going into this movie? Did you have any baggage of
Okay, so only a little. Um, I had seen The Breakfast Club before, which I think perfectly has those archetypes in it. You know, the ugly duckling, the Cinderella, the bad boy, the jock. All of those are just so perfectly encapsulated in The Breakfast Club. And that's the movie that I think of whenever I think of 80s teen movies. I know you know I haven't seen the other Molly Ringwald movies like Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles. Those are on my list. I'm familiar with them and I've seen a lot of imagery from them, but I haven't actually seen those movies yet. I did finally watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off
Mhm,
recently, and that one actually was a little bit different than what I expected from an 80s teen movie as
mhm.
well. And I think slightly falls outside of what I would consider to be normal.
It's pretty subversive,
It is. It is.
as is Heather's. That the subversive movies tend to end up in the cult classic category. So, yeah, they're definitely subversive. Whereas Breakfast Club is sort of the canon of 80s teen archetypes. So, I mean, it literally is about those archetypes
Right.
where they get happy endings. Spoiler.
I do like happy endings though. So,
Well, I do too, absolutely. But it's unusual to in real life. It is unusual to get happy endings in high school. I think a lot of people would argue that. So when you see a movie like Breakfast Club, which really resonates for a lot of people, there's a great deal of truth in Breakfast Club, but it's the sweet side of truth. And then you have Heather's, which takes those archetypes and twists them in the other direction. And I think there's also a lot of truth there too, in that, ugly ducklings don't always turn into swans, and Cinderellas aren't always happy when they have been put in the fancy dress, and bad boys don't always have hearts of gold, and jocks aren't always just misunderstood and need help with reading. Um, Man, that was mean. I'm sorry. um, but so like look at Bender. All right, so you've watched Breakfast Club. Bender is the bad boy of that movie, and in the end, he is very sweet with Molly Ringwald, the good girl character, and he's wearing her earring, but he's still got his jacket, and he's a tough guy with his longish hair, and he's probably still going to get into some fights, but also she's had a good influence on him, and she has reformed him a little bit by the end of that movie.
yeah, I think that's absolutely the happy ending that people want is they want to start with the bad boy and have him changed by the woman just enough that he's still the bad boy, but now he's good to her.
Yes. And so I love that. I love Bender so much. I love that character. And I love that trope. But then we have JD, who is bad boy to the max. And Veronica is mesmerized by him from the minute she sees him. So they're in the cafeteria, and she keeps whipping her head over to where this new kid is, and he's in a black trench coat. He doesn't look like any of the other teen characters in this movie. He's an outsider, obviously. She can't take her eyes off of him, and she contrives a reason to go talk to him and ask him her stupid lunchtime poll question, and then he shoots two people in the cafeteria. I mean,
That was the moment my head exploded.
so and she still goes out with him after that because it was only blanks. That's a
Yeah.
quite a line. They're not going to expel him.
Oh, wow. Yeah, for the 80s, that's probably true. Can you imagine?
Oh my god.
Wow.
No, I don't think that was even true in the 80s. So, I mean, that's the movie being over the top.
Right.
Really, even in 1988, if someone pulled a gun in the cafeteria of a school, they're going to be expelled.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope so. I've heard this question asked over and over again my whole life. It's a pop culture reference. People ask, "Are you a Heather or are you a Veronica?" And I never understood that question until I watched this movie. And it was actually while I was watching the movie that I remembered that that was even a thing that people have asked, which I think is silly in my brain. And I was thinking, oh, wow, I'm definitely a Veronica. But she goes out with this kid who just pulled a gun on two people in the cafeteria. And I'm thinking about that and I'm thinking, no, maybe I'm really not a Veronica because I think I would have liked him until he did that. And then I would have run far, far away.
Veronica's pretty self-destructive.
She is, absolutely.
It's not something that becomes obvious later in the movie. I mean, from the start, she's pretty self-destructive. She's not really doing all of the things that her friends want her to do. She's begrudgingly participating in the things that a teenager is supposed to participate in. And even when she's at the frat party, so they go to the frat party. She's has another encounter with JD at the gas station when they pick up corn nuts and slushies. And the corn nut there, those are Chekhov's corn nuts right there.
Okay, I have to ask this question. So I'm not sure how many of my previous episodes you've listened to, but my one of my other co-hosts, Matthew, has used that phrase several times, Chekhov's something, and I always just let it fly by. But I have no idea what it's from. What is this referencing?
Okay, so Chekhov's gun is like a dramatic principle of storytelling, and it's based off of Anton Chekhov is a playwright, a Russian playwright, and okay, so here's the quote. So Anton Chekhov says, "Remove everything that has no relevance to the story. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter it absolutely must go off. If it is not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. So if there's a gun in Act 1, it's going to go off in Act 2."
Okay.
So that's so those corn nuts are something that's going to have to be resolved later. You don't just mention corn nuts. That's a weird snack.
Right, right, right.
There's a reason that they're
Okay.
stopping for those corn nuts. So they stop for the corn nuts. They go to the frat party, which is very important to like Veronica's social standing going forward with the Heathers. And then she's sitting in the room with the dude bro frat boy, and she's burning herself. Like she's literally harming herself. She's got the is it a match or a lighter? I don't know, but she's like waving the flame under her hand, and she's like bringing her hand as close as she can, and burning herself, hurting herself.
I I absolutely I do not remember that.
And then she drops the match into the drink, and it bursts into flames. So she throws it out the window and starts a fire outside because
I
it
do
lands in.
remember that.
Okay. Well, she was prior to that, she was actually sitting there at a party, like in a back room, just, randomly seeing how close she could get her hand to the fire
Okay.
before she had to pull away. So I think that's a sign that there's something
Right.
not quite right here with our dear Veronica to begin with. So she's troubled.
I did notice that actually.
So she goes out with JD, even though he pulls a gun in the cafeteria. And we've established that you wouldn't go out with JD after he pulled a gun in the cafeteria.
Well, I like to think that I wouldn't. Maybe there may be more Veronica in me than I think there is, but I like to think I
But
wouldn't.
I might have gone still. So so when did you realize that JD was not just, a troubled dude, that he was actually a murdering homicidal maniac?
When he didn't tell Veronica that she picked up the drain cleaner.
Yes.
And mostly at that point, I was wondering, well, is he really going to let her drink it? or is he going to stop it in time? But then when she drank it, his reaction was just, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I mean, like he wasn't horrified. He was very excited and thrilled over it. And that's just not a normal reaction.
No, no, it is not. But it was so brilliant. So he was playing it as if he was shocked as well, but his shock read as enthusiasm and excitement, whereas Veronica was just mortified,
Right.
which thank God.
Although I have to be honest, her reactions weren't really what I would have expected them to be either. She was in shock immediately following, like when it happened, but she was still lucid enough to write the suicide note. And then she just kind of seemed fine. Like the
Yeah,
whole world kind of seemed fine that this girl died.
yeah,
I, I mean, what was it that her dad said? Um, how was your first day at school after the funeral? Or something like that. I'm like, really?
you know, and she was supposed to be, one of her best friends, right?
Right.
So one of her best friends has died in a terrible way, and life just goes on, which
Apparently, life goes on for you to murder other people.
yes, it does. But I think it also goes on in general. Like when my friends and I in high school were pretty dark and goth, and we would often joke that it was cool to know the dead kid, and not that it actually was, but there was this thing that happened, and this is something that's sort of played out in the movie, where there's sort of a performative nature to grief. And so we have that guidance counselor who's so excited to have some kind of emotional crisis to deal with as a school. She wants to have everyone hold hands and do feeling times. And she's just really enthusiastic about it. And it's like, I think you're kind of glad that someone died,
Right.
guidance counselor there. And I know from my experience in high school, we had a few tragic, a car accident, and we had a drug overdose. And in those cases, it's like sort of people sort of came out of the woodwork. And many of them probably had feelings that they needed to deal with, and there was nothing wrong with that. But there was just sort of a performative nature to some grief, and that's something that they take on in the movie and blow it up wide. It's where how much of that is because Heather Duke wants to be on the news, so she's going to tell 8 different stations about how they swapped clothes. Or is that something that you experienced or noticed in the movie?
Oh, definitely in the movie. I was actually upset at the lack of grief expressed over all of these dead kids. I was shocked at first when Heather died and nobody really seemed to care. I mean, the principal didn't even want to let the kids out early to deal with the grief, and the girls were mad that they didn't get an extra hour off, because just they didn't want to be at school.
Uh,
And they didn't care that she had died. And it made me angry, even though I know she was a terrible person. And listeners of this podcast know that I hate really terrible human beings. And Heather was a really terrible human being. All of the Heathers were really terrible human beings. But she deserved better than what she got.
yeah, but she was the supervillain at the start of the movie.
She
She was.
was, and I hated her.
And I think, pretty much everyone else hated her too. And that is one of the reasons why you didn't see the tears and the more obvious signs of grief. You saw, what was, oh, that's the scene where they're at the coffin and they're all thinking,
Yes.
and you can hear their thought processes at the coffin. And Heather Duke is like, you heard my prayers. Thank you. Alleluia.
Yes.
So, I mean, so obviously a lot of them had been sort of wishing her ill. And so that might explain some of that. Well, what is it Veronica says? I killed my best friend, and JD says,
And my worst
and your
enemy.
worst enemy. Same difference.
Yeah.
There's that level of high school and adolescent lack of empathy.
That is true. Teenagers are selfish little,
Monsters.
yes, that's a better word than I was thinking.
And so this movie really kind of addresses that sort of the monstrous nature of adolescence.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What do you make of Veronica after the third death at this point? You know, she's mad at JD because she thought that they weren't actually going to kill Kurt and what's his name?
Ram.
Ram. Kurt, yeah. She thought they weren't actually going to kill them and then they did, so she kind of backed off from JD a little bit.
Oh gosh, wait, we
She
have to talk about Kurt and Ram though.
Okay, let's talk about Kurt and Ram.
Because Kurt and Ram are obviously cartoons of the dude bro jock culture. And they're, sexist pigs and misogynists. And they have assaulted Heather McNamara and Veronica. And they've spread all of these rumors about Veronica having sex with them together.
Right.
And so they're gonna go. She's going, and they're gonna scare them.
Right.
And the moment that Kurt she misses the shot at Kurt,
Hmm.
that is the moment that she realizes that JD is insane. When she misses that shot and he goes running after him, in that moment right there is when she just realizes that none of this was fake, that he is actually killing people on purpose, and then she kills Kurt
She does kill Kurt, which I was
with
surprised by. I didn't think she was going to do it. And then,
with full knowledge that it's going to be murder. She kills him and then goes and like makes out with JD
right.
in the
And
car
then
afterwards.
she uses the cigarette lighter in the car to burn the crap out of her hand. And
Yes,
crazy, insane JD uses the burn to light his cigarette, which
cigarette.
completely freaked me out.
Because how crazy is that? That's how crazy he is. He gives zero fucks. He is just in it for the thrill of anarchy and chaos.
Right. So now that Veronica knows this, she theoretically kind of distances herself away from him a little bit. He shows back up and asks her out again, and Veronica says, I was thinking more along the lines of slitting Heather Duke's wrists open, making it look like suicide. Why would you say that to the person that you know will do it? Like what? I didn't really understand it.
I think she was saying that she knows that she knows that that's what he's actually interested in. So she's being sarcastic in a way that is more truthful than not. Like she's saying, I don't want to do this, but I know that's what you want to do. So that's his idea of a date.
It just frustrated me, I
I
think.
know. But it also speaks to her. There's a little more crazy, homicidal maniac in Veronica than she would probably admit.
Yeah, I can see that being true, especially the way she could does end up going after JD in the end.
It's that old there's a lot of truth in kidding. So she's
Yes.
kind of joking and being sarcastic, but actually also is really kind of thinking about killing another supposed friend.
Right.
So that is, I think Veronica was not a unwilling victim in a lot of the stuff that happened.
I agree with that. I think she made her own choices.
She really did.
They were just really bad choices.
Supremely awful, horrific choices. But she learns.
Maybe. I'm not sure she does, but we'll
No,
never
you don't
know.
think so?
Just
Like, so she goes and she figures out that she learns that JD is bad for her and that she has to stay away from him. She learns that she can't kill her friends.
But it's okay to kill JD. So I don't know. Just I have this image of her at the end of the movie, where she's got her hair all blown to hell, she's covered in soot, and she is standing there smoking a cigarette like
Wait,
she's the queen of the world.
she's not only smoking her cigarette, she lit her cigarette with the explosion from JD's body.
Right, right.
So it's like harkening back to where he lit his cigarette off of her burning palm. She's
And
got a cigarette in her mouth waiting for him to blow up, and that will light her cigarette.
right. And then she ends the movie by taking Heather number one's scrunchie away from Heather Duke and
Mhm.
saying that she is the new sheriff in town. And
Right.
so it makes me feel like we've kind of come full circle from her hating the popular girls to her taking over that
But
mantle.
she rides off into the sunset with Martha Dunstock
She does.
and says, "Hey, my date to the prom, Flake, let's get some movies and hang out."
So I think that's actually a great place to segue into what the original endings could have been. There were more than one, and one of them involves Martha. So
I don't know what these are. That's the How have I missed this?
one of them had an ending where Veronica does approach Martha, but Martha stabs her. And I think Martha calls her Heather, and Veronica
you,
yells at her, "My name's not Heather, you bitch." And it's this whole dark ending.
Veronica would not have, she would have deserved that. She would have deserved that because she was so rude and awful to Martha, you know, from the beginning when she wrote that note, the shower nozzle masturbation note.
Right, right.
So, Veronica is not an innocent here. So that ending would have been deserved, I guess, in the narrative structure, but it wouldn't have been as rewarding emotionally.
I do agree with that. The actual ending that was written in the script that was presented to the studio was that the school actually does get blown up and it ends with the prom happening in heaven because all of the kids are dead.
No,
And
no.
in that version, everybody's getting along because they're in heaven. And so, like, this whole social class thing kind of doesn't exist anymore. But apparently, the studio thought that was too dark and made him rewrite it, which is how we ended up with JD just blowing himself up.
That that the everyone going to heaven. It's not even that dark. It's like weird wish fulfillment that, they could just wipe out all of the things that separate them, and they can all just go be equals in heaven and get along and sing songs and dance. And no, that is
I feel like that would have been the cop out
that is
way
a
to
cop
go.
out. That
That's
is
like
that is
the
not an
neat little
arc.
bow.
That is not
Yeah.
that is not like character development in any way. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a natural end for JD to continue to spiral out until he straps some, explosives to his chest and decides to take the whole school with him. And it, I think, is a natural progression for Veronica to finally have broken her hold, or broken the hold JD has on her, and also to break the hold the Heathers have on her, that she can be in charge, she can be a leader, and she doesn't have to write mean notes to Martha Dunstock, she doesn't have to ignore Betty Finn, she can be in charge, and she can also decide to be friends with people outside of the social order. She has no fucks left to give. That's
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, given everything that we've talked about, do you think that this movie could have been made today?
oh hell no. No, No, it puts like the capital P in poor taste after all of the things that have happened in the world since this movie was originally made. You know, you talk about like Columbine and Sandy Hook, and it just, you can't be funny about school shootings.
Right, right. And even beyond that, teen suicide, making such a joke about it, especially given how high the suicide rates have gotten since the 80s, I think. And, I don't have those numbers in front of me to back it up. It just seems to be more prevalent to me, or at least
I think we talk
we
about it
hear
more.
about it more. Yeah.
That was one of the things that was in that movie. They were talking about teen suicide so much, where that was not something that was discussed a lot. There was a great deal of stigma. If someone did commit suicide, you might not know that that's what happened. It might come to you as not that they were in an accident. So I think it was bringing awareness in a way, but kind of ham-handed.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
it was not a sensitive portrayal of mental health at all.
Oh, no. It wasn't a sensitive portrayal of anything. I mean, all of it was just so
Oh, and
melodramatic, over the top, and dark.
eating disorders, suicide,
Yeah,
class
we didn't
issue.
even talk about the eating disorder thing, and it was so like fleeting in the movie that it just seemed completely normal, even though, I mean, it's clearly not. And I actually got weirded completely out by that scene when Veronica used her finger to make Heather Duke throw up, which
I
is not a normal
know.
thing, but the movie made it seem like this is something people do.
Yeah, I mean, it just sort of put it all out on the table. You know, and she's standing there in the salt and she's like filing her finger because she's going to be a
Hmm.
really caring friend and make sure she
Right.
doesn't have any sharp edges before she, you know, gets to
It's just,
work.
it's so horrifying.
This was the era of the after school special. And, you had Tracy Gold, who was on
Growing pains.
Growing Pains, had come out as having an eating disorder. They were just starting to really talk. That was another thing that didn't get talked about a lot in public, but in that sort of mid 80s time period, that's when it started to become more prevalent. You'd see it in a teen magazine. You might hear about it on Phil Donahue talk show.
Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that
Uh,
name in forever.
I know. So these were all issues that weren't really talked about a lot, but were starting to become hot topics, and they were all sort of in Heather's.
Yeah, yeah.
Just threw it all in there. But that is just absolutely crazy. No, it is not normal to go into the bathroom stall and like upchuck your friend. Like,
Upchuck your friend.
I
I
don't
like that.
I don't know. This is just completely crazy. So no, I don't know that we could see a Heather's with the same sort of callous approach to.
Are there, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this question. Do you think it's possible to make a movie that has this level of black comedy and satire if its topics were different? So if it didn't use school shootings and bombs, if it was something else that was subversive, do you think that we could still do that today, or do you think that we live in a society right now where that just wouldn't go over well?
Oh, I think there are still absolutely black comedies being made. It's just, yeah, I think it's just making sure that you're not hitting those issues that are just really raw. I'm trying to
Right.
think of something I've seen recently that would fall in line of a black comedy. Well, I mean, I just recently watched the Santa Clarita Diet. That is black comedy.
That is absolutely a black comedy. I haven't seen it yet, but
Oh,
I plan to.
it's so good, and it is definitely black comedy. It's definitely making fun of suburbia. It's making fun of gender roles. It's making fun of the diet industry.
Hmm.
there's a lot there. I think there's a lot of things that can still be made fun of in that kind of way.
Okay.
Just probably not school shootings.
Yeah, definitely not school shootings. So, this week I am doing something a little bit different, and I have a new segment where listeners have submitted questions for us to talk about if we didn't hit on them in our discussion. So, I thought we'd go through those and see where the conversation takes us.
Awesome.
I actually have questions from four different Kates today. So,
Wow.
I
So we
apparently
had
know a
Heather's
lot of people named Kate. Yeah.
and we
Yeah,
had
the
Kate's.
Kates. So, from my friend Kate Met, she said fans and the filmmakers have often talked about a sequel for Heathers. Do you think there's an opening for a sequel? Do sequels coming so long after the originals hurt the original, and would you watch it?
I cannot wrap my head around what a satisfying sequel would be for this story, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't be open to one. Like, would it be like
Right.
adult Veronica, like with her kid in high school, or would it be
Well, that
adult
was the
Veronica?
idea for one of the TV shows that never got off the ground. It was going to be Veronica moving back to the same town with her teenage daughter. And her teenage daughter has to deal with her own version of the Heathers that I think was going to be called the Ashleys.
The
You
Ashleys, like
know?
in Recess, the cartoon.
Sure.
You don't know the cartoon Recess?
I don't remember it.
Oh,
It sounds
that's okay.
familiar.
I think it was Recess where on the playground there were a group of girls called the Ashleys who were very much like the Heathers. Maybe it was a
Okay.
different show. I don't know. But anyway,
Remember, my podcast is called Pop Culturally Deprived, so don't take me
yes.
not knowing as a reason for you to doubt yourself.
No, it's definitely so in this possible sequel where she is back in town with her daughter in high school, is she having to deal with the fact that she murdered several people in the past? So,
Oh, that would be actually, I think I would like to watch that. I want to watch Veronica going to therapy to deal with her teenage murderous self.
with her body count.
Yes, absolutely.
That
I
could
think
be
that'd be great.
interesting. With like a
You're an
bumbling sheriff.
you're a writer. You should do this.
No.
Although, you know what though? Okay, so I could just headcanon that Stranger Things is the Heather sequel because her character is basically a grown-up Veronica.
Ha ha ha.
I mean, yeah, let's do that. I like that.
I'll have to watch Stranger Things now. We've been saving it, so
Oh, it's really good. Although, I mean, you talked about how Winona Ryder kind of has a type that she plays, and the character in Stranger Things is very much along those same lines. She's just an adult with kids.
maybe she will be a part of my. I have a holy trinity of Winona Ryder, which is Beetlejuice, Heather's, Edward Scissorhands. I
Which
guess
I
I
think is
could
her best work. So,
I guess I could expand it out because I also like her in Reality Bites, but that's sort of so we have Beetlejuice is young teenage Winona Ryder, and then you have Heather's, which is kind of like midpoint teenage Winona Ryder, and then Edward Scissorhands would be like the top end of teenage Winona Ryder, and then she goes to college in Reality Bites, and then she's like a mom in Stranger Things.
there
So
you go. I think that's perfect. Absolutely.
uh,
Same character all the way through.
just yeah, just getting progressively more fucked up.
Yes, absolutely.
I love it.
So, second Kate, at Katie Charoux on Twitter asks, what did you think about the costuming, particularly the colors?
I loved how stylized the set, the setting as well as the costuming. It was very like the red, Heather Chandler's red, where she is always in something red. She's got the red scrunchie. Red was such a iconic power color in the 80s. It was all about the power suit and the power tie, and she was all about the power. And then you got to her house, And you, when you get into her house and they're entering it and they're coming in off the porch and the red chairs are outside, and then you get in the kitchen and all of the accessories in the kitchen are red, and it's just everywhere, you know, you're in Heather Chandler's domain. And then Veronica's colors were kind of like a dark blue. So everywhere you see her, you know, so they just get really that dreamlike quality where everything has a meaning.
I didn't notice Veronica's color at first, but they showed this shot that was of her from like the knee down. And I don't remember at what point in the movie it was, but she was wearing a blue pencil skirt, blue tights, and blue shoes. And
Hmm.
so it was just solid blue all the way down. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of blue. And then
Hmm.
I started noticing it. There was her room was blue. It just
Yeah,
every character had their own color and it
you know, Heather
stayed
McNamara was
throughout.
yellow, and so she had her yellows everywhere. It just was very saturated. JD was black. You had, you know, everything was saturated. So almost like a dream. There was a dreamlike quality to all of it, I felt.
Well, and even the school colors were red and white, which is very fitting for Heather number one for her color to be red too, because she was the queen of school.
Right. Yes. So I loved it. I thought those were great choices. It's very subtle. I think it's something you maybe pick on upon repeat watching. It's one of those things that informs your viewing on a subconscious level, but as you watch it again and again and again, it starts to become more obvious. You're like, oh, wow.
Right. Okay, Kate number three, Kate D, who's at Kate Fu on Twitter. Who do you find most quotable?
Heather Chandler.
Of course. She had a lot of really great lines.
She has the best lines. I mean, there are a lot of great lines in the movie, and I do drop them in conversation a fair bit. Even I'm pretty sure that people don't know what I'm talking about, which is nothing new, but like Eskimo is something I'll just randomly drop in conversation. If something's particularly absurd, I'll just be like Eskimo. Or the I love my dead gay son is is a favorite line from the movie. It's just so poignant and absurd, and it's a great line. And cornuts, another one I toss into conversation randomly, but fuck me gently with a chainsaw is a brilliant line.
It is a brilliant line, and it kind of surprised me when I first heard it because I think that's the first really visceral line we get in the movie from Heather.
Yes.
And it surprised me just because you've got these girls who are very well dressed, they seem very proper, they're playing croquet in the garden, and then you get fuck me gently with a chainsaw. And I was just like, holy cow.
It is the most impossible thing. You can do nothing gently with a chainsaw, but you certainly can't fuck anything with a chainsaw at
You know,
all.
so I actually read something about this quote. It was inspired by I can't remember the movie, but another movie had a line that said "fuck me gently with a crowbar." And Kim Walker thought that a chainsaw was more feminine than a crowbar, and so that's why this line is "fuck me gently with a chainsaw."
More feminine?
Yeah, I don't quite see that, but I did read that. I read that yesterday, in one of the many fun fact articles I was reading about Heather's. And I was like, okay, a
That
chainsaw is
is
more feminine than a
amazing. I
crowbar.
wonder if she was envisioning like a gas powered chainsaw where you have to like yank a cord and like get it started, or if she was thinking of like one of the small plug in models, or like what exactly was she envisioning that was feminine about a chainsaw? Because this was also in the era of, you know, like Michael Myers and like, oh crap, Leatherface running through the woods with a chainsaw, like to murder teenagers.
Well, I mean, this was a murdering teenagers movie
Right,
too, so
exactly. So I don't I can't fathom how it was perceived as being feminine. I could see where it was perceived as being like making a statement.
right.
But the femininity of the chainsaw, that's hilarious. I love it. Now I want to say it even more. I love it.
Okay, next. Oh, no, no, wait. I have to say my favorite quote from the movie.
Yeah.
My favorite quote from the movie is actually a Veronica quote because, surprise, surprise, I really am kind of a Veronica. She says, "My teen angst bullshit has a body count." And that's the whole movie right there.
Yes,
That's the entire movie. That's all you need to know. And I like it. It's so succinct
it
and so
is.
perfect. So, our last Kate, at Kate Gillerin on Twitter, asks if we were at any point enamored of JD. And I have to say, if you read my thoughts doc, which will be linked in the show notes, it's very interesting because my thought number 6 on the list is I forgot how attractive Christian Slater was in the 80s because I did. And he was really pretty.
Yeah.
But by the time I got to thought number 39, Christian Slater is no longer hot. He was
Mm.
too crazy to be hot at that point. So it was a very quick love that JD and I had.
Do you remember what point in the movie that was when he ceased to be hot?
It was, oh, it's very hard to tell based on my notes. My notes at this point are Jesus fucking Christ, this is dark. So the cop uses something to pick up the gun and then touches it with his bare hand. Nice work. They sure do sleep easy for murderers. What the hell? Christian Slater is no longer hot. That was my thought
So,
progression. So
I bet that was when he lit his cigarette on her burning hand.
you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. The crazy was just too much for me at that point. I couldn't handle it.
Yeah. I think I hung in longer just because I like I'm crazy. And for me, the movie was very much an exploration of the outside edges of society's norms, which is a place where I'm very happy playing. I like to dig into those boundaries and sometimes push past them. And this movie was completely a Technicolor fever dream. So it never felt like the real world to me watching this movie. And
I can see
that
that.
made it a little easier, I think. And as well, in my early viewings, I didn't have romantic feelings for anybody at all. I was still like 10 years old. Um,
Oh,
it
but he
was
was still
later.
pretty to look at least,
It
right?
was. And it was like, it was exciting. And like, I didn't know what was going to happen. And so all of that was in my early viewings. And then as I got older and then really started to have underpants feelings for Christian Slater, I was totally fine with him being a little homicidal because it wasn't real.
Right, right.
And I'm twisted that way. So
That's perfectly okay because it makes you write really amazing bad boys in your books, and I love to read them. So that's fantastic.
thank you.
I I do want to ask, so you said that it's a Technicolor fever dream, and so it never felt real to you. How did you feel about the scene with Martha when she pins a suicide note to her chest and walks out into traffic?
That was pretty awful because it was the only real suicide of the movie.
Right.
And I thought that the way it was handled, as opposed to the murder suicides, where it was completely vivid. You know, you have the corn nuts moment where she like falls smashing into the glass table with vomit and glass everywhere, and it's you're all up in that mess. And the same thing with, you know, Kurt and Ram, and there's the bloody bullet hole in his neck, and it's all out there. But Martha, pins the note, and it's very powerful where she's kind of like almost like a kid trying to jump into double dutch.
Right.
So she's sort of like kind of back and forth before she really just dives, walks into it. And then the camera pans away and you just hear like the horns and you don't see anything. And I thought that spoke to like a sensitivity to actual suicide versus the horrors of the murderous, the popular crowd kind of imploding
Right.
in a
And
power vacuum.
she's the only one who didn't actually die. So
Exactly.
I think
So,
that was definitely done on purpose.
oh yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Next up from Sarah Thomas at Thomas Sarah C. How does this movie relate to your viewing of other late 80s, early 90s films? How does it reflect of the society of the time? Who is the film aimed at and why did that audience connect with it? Which I think you seem to be the absolute target audience for this movie. So,
I think the audience for this movie was the misunderstood, angry, apathetic teenager. The kind of kid that would watch, oh, what was that movie? She's All That. So we're going to talk about other films in the
mhm.
80s and 90s. You saw She's All That, right?
Of course I have. It's
Of
a
course, it's a
90s
90s
teen
teen movie.
movie.
So you saw it. So you have She's All That. Now I watched that. When did that come out? Like 1996, I think, or how
I probably 98,
was it
99-ish.
that late? I'm gonna have to check this because it's gonna. It was 99. Okay, so I was 19 when I saw She's All That, and I was a goth teenager with a lot of sass and attitude and anger and morbidness. And watching a movie like She's All That made me scoff because no, that is not possible. There's
Right.
no there's no way, no how. Like if some popular dude had approached me, I would have been like, nope.
Right.
And so those movies just didn't resonate for me at all. But Heather's really did because it kind of looked at the ugly truth, which was that you really do kind of hate the popular crowd and you do maybe sometimes even wish them dead, which is terrible now to think about. I can't even imagine it, but I know in the horrible angst of my adolescence, I probably did think, oh my God, I wish she would just die.
Right.
It's something like the kids say things like, go die in a fire or drop dead or, whatever. And we can look back on it and laugh, but it's a horrible feeling as a teenager to just kind of be so angry and impotent. There's not a lot you can do about the hierarchy of the social order.
Right. So there is another movie from 1999 that reminds me very much of Heather's. Have you ever seen Jawbreaker?
Yes.
That's the closest comparison I can come up with to a 90s teen movie that kind of fits into this same black comedy genre.
Yes. That would be a good parallel. I did not love Jawbreaker the way that I loved Heather's. So I'd have to spend some time analyzing why that is.
Well, they look completely different. I mean, Jawbreaker has the look of that 90s bubblegum
Mhm.
pop movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like almost Barbie-like. And Heather's doesn't have that at all. Heather's is actually dark.
Yeah, Heather's has kind of almost like a Tim Burton-y vibe to it.
Well, I think that's just because of Winona Ryder.
I don't know, but it also is that sort of like color saturation and the stylized costuming and the characterness of the different characters. But yeah, it might just be Winona Ryder's presence in there. But Jawbreaker was great. I really enjoyed that. I love Rose McGowan. She's
Hmm.
another goth Barbie of my heart. Uh,
That
so,
describes her pretty perfectly, actually.
there have been some other sort of bleak but funny high school murder movies. Um, Killing Mr. Griffin. I'm trying to remember. When did that come out?
Was that the Barry Watson, Katie Holmes movie?
Yes.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I think they played it a little too straight though. And then, of course, like you have The Craft,
That was my jam.
which has some black comedy in it. It's,
Absolutely. I own that movie and I have watched it many, many times.
yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely a genre that appeals, that sort of black teen comedy.
So Matthew has also asked a question about other movies, and I'm not sure there's actually a correlation between the movies that he asked about and Heather's, and I want to get your opinion. He asked, would Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Final Destination be able to exist without Heather's?
Yeah, absolutely. Because those are more they're horror movies. They're
Right.
teen horror movies. And
They're straight horror movies instead of that black satire
I
of
mean,
Heather's.
Scream definitely has satire happening because it is like, but it's very meta. I mean, they literally talk about other horror movies within the movie.
Right.
So there's satire happening, but it's not, I wouldn't call it subversive. And there's a long history of funny horror movies for teenagers. Nightmare on Elm Street, funny horror movie for teenagers. I don't think you would have, well, Scream is Wes Craven, and Wes Craven did Nightmare on Elm Street. So, you know,
I haven't actually seen Nightmare on Elm Street. It's on my list.
oh, it's pretty. I mean, are you into gore?
It depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, I don't think I'm ever actually into gore, but I can tolerate it sometimes.
Okay. Well, you definitely want to be ready to cover your eyes because it's a horror movie for sure, first and foremost. But it happened to also be funny, which is what was really interesting about Nightmare on Elm Street and what sort of made the franchise blow up was that it was a horror movie and it was a true horror movie, but there was humor there that wasn't accidental.
Kind of like what Joss Whedon did with The Cabin in the Woods.
Well, Cabin in the Woods definitely pays homage to the horror movies that came before. There are a lot of references. One of the reasons why I love Cabin in the Woods so much was because I recognized all of the references to horror movies from the 80s and, early 90s. So,
Which of
that's
course I
one.
have no frame of reference for because
I
I haven't
know.
seen anything.
You're going to want to watch Cabin in the Woods again after you finish your education in
I will
pop
do that.
culturally deprived movies. But I love horror movies too so much, and Heather's is a horror movie, but it's also a teen comedy. It lives in the intersection of those places. But I don't think it's a horror movie in the same way that Scream or I Know What You Did Last Summer or Final Destination are horror movies. It's more subtle than that.
Right. I get that. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about with Heather's? Have we covered everything? Have we missed anything?
I think we've covered everything. We covered a lot, dude.
We did. We've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, which is longer than I expected.
Wow.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Pop Culturally Deprived, where we'll take our first foray into comics with DC's Batman Year One. Until then, please remember to rate and review us on iTunes. If you want to get in touch, you can follow me on Twitter at Mandy K. You can email me at mandyk@popculturallydeprived.com, or you can comment on this post on popculturallydeprived.com. You can also find Sherry on Twitter at Sherry Slade. Until next time, I'm Mandy K.
And I'm Corn Nuts.